Continuing our special with Kathi Miracle, important tips on caring for the caregiver.
Vlogging pod starts like a conversation. Cup of coffee with no destination. Just voices trying to understand what's happening across this land. From your stories told to the pages turned. Every question, every word, supported by SheSharesStudios.net.
Hello, and welcome to the Vlogging Pod. We're back with dementia educator and advocate Kathi Miracle for another discussion focused on helping families better understand the challenges that often accompany dementia and cognitive decline. Now, for those listening who may not have been turning into the last few episodes, Kathi, what are some of the signs and symptoms families should be looking for that could indicate dementia or cognitive decline?
Well, thank you for having me. I love being on your show, so I'm happy
My
to be
pleasure.
back. And so I always tell people that when someone sort of gets out of their routine, somebody who maybe looks disheveled instead of meticulous, someone who's sleeping more or sleeping less, they're eating more, they're eating less, the bills are piling up or the mail's piling up, the laundry is, they're not grocery shopping, or they're starting to lose things. The car keys end up in the cereal box, the remote control ends up in a drawer, a dresser drawer. They can't find their wallet. Those types of things are starting to be concerning. The other thing is they'll ask repetitive questions or they start having some really bizarre conversations with individuals. Most times what I see family members do is they start getting very nervous and they go into a denial mode and they start helping make excuses for why that's happening. Like, oh, someone didn't get a good night's sleep. Somebody hasn't been feeling well. They've had a cold. They had the flu. All of a sudden we start making excuses for the person and we kind of go into this denial state when really what we should be doing is paying more attention and observing and documenting things to see if this is a pattern. Because I will say that there are times when, when you don't feel good, you're not at your best, you're not going to be. Is that an isolated event or are we starting to see days and weeks of a similar occurrence happening? And so those early parts of the dementia journey can be kind of like, well, is something happening? Is something not? And where families, kind of like when someone gets bit by a dog, they don't want to go back to pet that dog again. When families start to say, Mom, Dad, is something going on? Mom or Dad might get very defensive and angry, like, I know what I'm doing. Don't tell me, and so then as a child, or even as a spouse, we get a little nervous of trying to readdress that topic again because we got bit. And so the more you can observe, it's where I tell families, let me deliver that news because I don't care if they're mad at me. I can tell somebody they can't drive anymore. I can tell somebody this is the path they're going down. They can disagree with me all they want, but then they're mad at me. They're not mad at you as a family member. So I've had those tough conversations before with individuals, but you want to start recognizing the signs. You want to start documenting it, whether you're documenting in a journal, you're audio recording something, you're videotaping something. The more documentation you have to present to a medical professional, the more complete picture that then they have to understand, is this truly something where we would be concerned about cognitive decline or dementia diagnosis, or is something else possibly causing this that is fixable?
Right. So now, most people, myself included, think about dementia, they naturally focus on the person they don't focus on the person receiving care, but I'm sorry, they do focus on the person receiving care. Tongue-tied, looking at the next sentence. But behind every person living with dementia, there is often a caregiver trying to balance the responsibilities, emotions, and day-to-day challenges.
Yep.
So today, we'd like to spend some time talking about caregiver and why caring for yourself is so much important part of or for caring for someone else as well.
Yep.
So, Kathi, now, why is a caregiver burnout so common?
So statistically, if you looked at statistics, caregivers will have far more serious health concerns than the person they're providing care to. And caregiver burnout is a absolutely real thing. When you look at the definition of it, Caregiver burnout is a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion that occurs when a person is taking care of another person or persons. We see even professionals who get into caregiver burnout. This is the person who's working, picking up extra shifts, or the person who's working a 16-hour day instead of a 8-hour day. So we see it in both family caregivers and professional caregivers. And so I speak and educate to both sides, to all caregivers out there. We forget as a parent of a baby who's teething, we get caregiver burnout because we don't get the
Oh,
sleep
yeah.
we need, right? So that starts happening when we're taking care of young children or a sick individual. But we sort of somehow block that out when we start taking care of a spouse or a parent on how hard this is, and it becomes even more difficult. So, first and foremost, I tell people that caregiver burnout is a real thing. It's not something imaginary, it's not somebody trying to get attention. It truly is a real thing, and it's something that we want to avoid at all costs. When I actually get up and I speak at conferences and I do professional trainings, and I love when I get to be a keynote speaker at a conference, which I was about a year ago. And it was a day, the conference was all about caring for the caregiver, which was such a fabulous conference. It was a 1-day conference where people got brought in, and the people hosting the conference actually had, you could bring the person with dementia and they would take care of them and keep them active for the full day. So the caregiver actually could spend the whole day focused on caring for themselves. And I was lucky
Wow.
enough to be invited to to be the keynote speaker at this event. And so I, said, "Hey, how many of you?" There was probably about 100 people in the room, and I said, "How many of you, when you were growing up, please raise your hand," said, "Oh my God, I hope I get to be a caregiver to a dementia person." And nobody raised their hand. And, people kind of laughed a little bit. And I said, "Okay, so this was kind of a role you got catapulted into. You didn't get any training, you didn't get a manual, you didn't have any education or experience. Just all of a sudden, one day you found yourself being a caregiver." And that's kind of really what happens to people, is they feel like they kind of got thrown into this, didn't really plan for it. This was not what their retirement years were supposed to be about. And so it's, they can be resentful at times, but they know they're going to take care of this person. I've also many times with spouses kind of tried to talk to them about, nowhere in the Bible does it say that you have to care for this person by yourself. But somehow people who've been married for 50, 60, even 70 years believe that in front of God, family, and friends, I took a vow for better or for worse, in sickness and in health. And they want to honor that vow. And I don't want them to not honor it, but it doesn't say you have to do it alone. So I've
Mhm.
redefined wedding vows a lot of times for people to say, bringing somebody in to help you doesn't mean you're not honoring your vow. It means you're human and you need help and you need support. Nobody, like when people move family members into my buildings, they're like, "You guys are angels. I don't know how you do it." I go, "Well, let's start with nobody here does it by themselves. We have 3 different shifts. Somebody gets frustrated, they can tap out and someone else is there to support them. But you're trying to do this at home all by yourself, and that's complicated. You're not getting the sleep
Right.
you need. You're not taking care of yourself." The other thing I'll ask when I get a chance to speak is I'll say, "How many of you have flown on an airplane?" And a lot of people raise their hand. Most people in the room will raise their hand. And I said, "Okay, for those of you who actually pay attention to when a flight attendant is doing their safety speech, one of the
Yeah.
things that they say, well, if the cabin loses pressure, an oxygen mask is going to fall. And the very first thing you do is you put the oxygen mask on yourself before you start to assist a loved one or a child or an aging parent." So even the airlines know and talk to people about, you take care of yourself first. So somehow people tend to forget that as a caregiver, they think it's selfish, they think, or they're told it's being selfish, and it's really not. So the analogy I like to use, or I'll actually have this as a demonstration when I get to speak sometimes, is I'll have a pitcher, and in that pitcher is water or some sort of fluid. That is my energy. I'm the pitcher. The fluid in that pitcher is my energy. Now, in the table, I may have 5 or 10 different glasses, and those glasses are my responsibilities. So as I pour my energy into each of my responsibilities, at some point, there's no more fluid in the pitcher. If you do not take time to replenish that fluid through whatever feeds your soul, you will burn out. You will have a nervous breakdown. You will hit a brick wall. You will have serious health concerns. And if you don't take the time to take care of yourself, God's going to step in and do it for you. And when He steps in, it's a stroke, it's a heart attack, It's an ulcer that's burst. It's something that's going to put you down to make you take care of yourself. So
Mm.
I tell caregivers all the time, and people will say, well, what kind of ideas? What should I be doing? And I go, well, what feeds your soul is going to be different than what feeds my soul. So for me, I'd love to go take a nap. I'd love to go to get a massage. I'd love to just watch a great movie with a buttered popcorn. But not everybody likes getting a massage. Not everybody's going to take a hot bubble bath. Not everyone's going to like to go for a walk or they can't. So I always tell people, what is it that feeds your soul? For whatever feeds your soul, that's what you need to take a step back from. So one of the things I tell people when you know you're going to be taking care of somebody with dementia, get your network in order, whether that's family, friends, volunteers from church, even hiring professionals to come in and sit with the person or do something with them to go take a nap, you want to start building that into your schedule, your routine before it's too late. And especially if you're going to have somebody come in from the outside to spend time with them, do it while the person still understands this person's coming in to play checkers with me, or this person's going to come in and we're going to go for a walk. Because if you wait to introduce that too late in the dementia journey, your person with dementia is going to fire that person. They're going to kick them out. They don't think they need to be there. And now you have a bigger problem on your hands.
Right. When you talk about caregivers, I would think the biggest thing is probably guilt.
Yes.
I think I mean, it'd just be from my assessment. Again, my mother doesn't have dementia, but it was different challenges, from her being in her own house now being here,
Mhm.
or not knowing how to do something. And I think I had the biggest burnout, but also I had so much guilt because my father was no longer here and I felt like I had to be on 24/7.
Mhm.
And as soon as I would say, "No, mom, I can't do that," or there's always a million questions, "Why not?" And then I feel guilty because I would think, "I just want a day off," you know?
Right.
So what do you tell caregivers how to handle that kinda guilt?
Well, it's interesting because guilt comes from different reasons. So, if people who were raised Catholic, that's an entire lifetime of guilt. Well, in certain ethnicities, the Hispanic culture, the Asian culture, the Native American culture, you grow up in a culture where you take care of your own. You don't bring in
Mhm,
outside help. There's a lot of things. So when I'm talking to caregivers, I'm trying to determine where is it coming from first. Because if it is coming from a religious belief, that's very difficult to break. If it is coming from an ethnicity or a cultural thing, that's very difficult to break. And so I always want to say, what's the cause of the burnout? Let's find out where the guilt is coming from, and then let's address the root of the problem. That's where we want to go. I can give a lot of advice, I can give a lot of guidance, but if I'm not really trying to dig deep and find out where's the root of the problem, then I'm going to be offer guidance and advice that's really not going to be very helpful. So when I talk to families about the guilt piece of it, there are, as a caregiver, I was raised, I was actually raised in a Catholic Hispanic family. That was so I have a double whammy with me. Um, I remember, my mom sitting my siblings. I have an older brother, an older sister, and a younger sister. And I remember, when my mom and dad had their estate plan ready to go, my mom said, "I want you all to promise us you will never put us in an assisted living or a nursing home."
Oh, yeah, we've heard that before too. Yeah, I've heard that, yeah.
Promise. No, I'm like, "Oh my god, never make a promise like that." And my 2 sisters immediately, because you grow up, being respectful and you honor your mother and your father, and
Mhm,
you don't talk back and you don't argue and it's not up for discussion. I mean, all those things play into how we were raised. And my
mhm.
2 sisters immediately said, "Mom, Dad, we promise we will never do that to you." And my mom looked at me very sternly and she goes, "You didn't answer." I go, "'Cause I'm not making that promise." I go, "If that's the best place for you to be, that's where I'm putting you." And so initially, my mom did not make me her medical power of attorney. And she's like, "Okay." And so over the years, my
Mm.
parents realized I had the best knowledge, the best information to be in with them in an emergency room or whatever. And eventually, yeah, my dad did need to go to an assisted living, and my mom currently lives in independent living and senior living since my dad's passed away. But Early on, it's better to have those conversations early on. I mean, by the time you get to somebody who is already has dementia or they have difficulty understanding, families haven't had those hard conversations. And so, yeah, the guilt's going to be there. And my mom knew from a long time ago, my dad knew from a long time ago where I stood on this topic, and I was never going to make that promise to them. And so when we make those promises, that's where the guilt first starts happening, is because we make those promises when mom and dad are really healthy or when a spouse is really healthy. We make that promise only to find out a few years later we can't keep that promise.
Right.
Now the guilt sets in, and now I feel terrible that I can't keep or honor a promise that that I made. And so the first step is don't ever make the promise. That's the first step. But if you have made the promise and it's really hard to then now dance around all of that. So it's really hard to say, don't feel guilty about that, because the person themselves has to work through those feelings on their own. And they have to realize I am making the decision that's best for my mom and dad in this moment. It's kind of like, how many parents feel guilty when they tell a child, no, you're not going to have that candy. No, you're not going to have that. We call that tough love, right? We're making
Mhm.
a decision because that child is not capable of making a decision that's safe for them or that's good for them, or you're not staying up till 3 in the morning and you have a test to take tomorrow. Like, let's reason this out. So it's interesting that as a parent, we don't feel guilty. We just define that as tough love, and I'm doing what's best because they don't know. But yet, when it's my parent or my spouse, all of a sudden I feel guilty for making those same decisions from a safety standpoint, from understanding and helping them know that this isn't what's best for them.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's really about looking at the situation. Where is that guilt coming from? And then let's dig in and solve the root problem of it so that you can continue to move forward caring for that person in the best way that you can. I tell people all the time, you're human. First of all, you're human,
Mhm.
and you're going to make mistakes. Every decision I've made throughout my career hasn't always been the right one or the best one. It was what I thought was best with the information I had in that moment. And would I make a different decision? Maybe if I wasn't in a crisis, or maybe when I can look back or I had more information, maybe I would have. Maybe I would have made the same decision. But I tell people all the time, when families get really guilty or they feel really bad or they're crying and I'm talking with them, I'm like, okay, well, that makes you human. Let's start with you're human and you can only handle so much. And there's only so many hours in a day. So let's start with that. I also look at causes. Like, what's the cause of the breakdown? What's the cause of the guilt? What's the cause of the burnout? And then we're going back to let's solve the root of the problem.
Right. So now let's take a minute, look at the caregiver, but let's look who surrounding the caregiver.
Mhm.
So, what are practical ways relatives and friends can chip in and help support not so much the one who's being caregiven, but the caregiver?
The caregiver. So, there are people who actually do this all alone. Like, there's husband and wives who never had children, or they live in a rural area.
Mm.
And so there are times,
It's sounding familiar.
yeah, so, or like, some people have an
Mhm.
only child, and that
Mm.
only child maybe is not married or have kids of their own. So not everybody has a solid network, or they don't believe they do. So I always start with, who do you believe is in your network? Let's just start writing that down. Sometimes, I've actually cared for one family where there was one son and 10 daughters, and the son was the oldest. And, having too many cooks in the kitchen can become just as challenging as having no cooks in the
Oh,
kitchen
yeah.
too, because now
Yeah.
everybody has an opinion. So we want to start with, who do you believe is your network? And again, that could be family, that could be neighbors. Some individuals have lived in the same neighborhood for 40 or 50 years. They know everybody who lives around them. They've attended the same church for 40 years. So there's a very positive and strong support from church volunteers. Who is your doctor? Who is your nurse? Who are professional caregivers? When I lived in Northern Colorado, there was a great peer support group up there. It was an organization that ran it by volunteers, but it was people who would retire who would go visit people who were in their homes. So it's somebody who is 60 or 65 or 70 years old who can have a conversation about when Pearl Harbor was bombed, or they knew when the astronaut, first landed on the moon. They could share those memories with them, and they felt more comfortable talking to someone their own age versus someone who was 22 years old and had no idea that, Pearl Harbor had been bombed in December. So it's people tend to like talking to people their own age. So look at the resources in your own community because I assure you it's going to be different in a metropolitan area versus a rural area.
Mhm.
And actually, rural areas sometimes have a larger support system because they're used to supporting each other from, oh yeah, you need to do this, I'll take your kids to the basketball game, or someone gets hurt and everybody brings over, their best apple pie or baked chicken or whatever. Nobody has to have food. Nobody has to make
I
food for how long because the rural communities really are used to knowing everybody in that community and supporting
I
them.
can I can speak to that for one incident. I know a family member in the area whose father had dementia, and it went from house to house, just people stopping and letting them know that the person had left the house, and all of us went out looking. I'd never met the person, but we went out looking for this person who had just had walked away from the house. That was our entire community,
Mhm.
and they did find them, but that was I just thought that that was the most, you know what I mean, fabulous moment in my community that you would have thought that everybody just said, "Okay, I don't know them personally, but that's it." They just dropped everything and went on the search. So
Yeah,
you don't know until you get your feet wet. Yeah.
you don't know until you get your feet wet, but I do find that rural communities, while they don't have a lot of the same resources like an adult day program or a home care agency, they have a lot more community support than people in metropolitan areas. I mean, even where I live in a community south of Denver, and I live in a cul-de-sac. I can tell you my
Mm.
neighbors who live on the left side of me, and I can tell you the neighbors who live on the right side of me. I couldn't tell you the names of anybody else in my cul-de-sac. Which is and I've lived here for about 18 months, so that's kinda sad that I
Mm.
don't know that, but people in metropolitan areas don't always know the neighbor who lives across the street from them or the person behind them, and so you don't have as much of a community feel sometimes as you do in a rural community. Now, metropolitan, you definitely have more resources, and so I always encourage people, like, if you're not sure what your resources are in your community, if you have an Alzheimer's association, if you have an area agency on aging, a lot of times they immediately can tell you if there's Meals on Wheels or what support services there are. Are there a support group? A lot of times they'll have a list of those things already. Sometimes churches will collect those lists and they have an idea of who their resources are. Hospitals, like social workers in a hospital, they also may have a list of resources. So those are, if you're not really sure and you kind of have a mind block, those are the different resources that I would tell you, or even a senior center. Senior centers a lot of times may have a lot of those lists on hand as well. And so they can quickly give you something where you're not trying to figure it out all on your own.
That's helpful. So now, Kathy, as we finish up our conversation today, what's one message of encouragement you'd like to leave with caregivers who may be listening and feel stretched thin right now?
I'd like to just make sure they understand and know that caregiver burnout is a real thing. It can lead to very serious health concerns, and taking care of yourself is not selfish. It is actually, if you are not around, you're not going to be able to take care of anybody else that really relies and needs on you. So, taking care of yourself and making a list of things that truly feed your soul and scheduling it. If you're going to try and fit it in, it will never happen. Actually put it on your schedule, actually block out time and make sure that it happens.
That's a good one. So thank you so much, Kathy, once again for being on the program.
You bet. Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you back. I want to thank our listeners. Until next time, bye bye for now.